Make the ground shake.
What is up, you awesome kissers? It's CistReactZ here, and welcome back to Freddy's The Silver Eyes. Now, you guys have enjoyed my first look and impressions, and I asked you guys, did you guys want me to read the whole book for you guys? And due to a large amount of requests, yes, I had to read the rest of the book for you guys. So, yeah. Let's get back to where we were. Yesterday was at, I have to get out, so, yeah. Once again, like a dummy, I just woke up and started to do this again, so if my reading's off, don't judge. And yes, there are eyes staring at you. Not my eyes, but you'll find the eyes soon. Anyway, I have to get out. I have to. The panicked thought was of no help. There was no way out. Her arm ached, and she wanted to sob aloud. Blood was soaking through the tattered bandage, and it seemed as though she could feel it draining out of her. The console a few feet away crashed against the wall, and Charlie flinched. He was getting closer. She could hear the grinding of gears and the clicking of servos. So, she's getting chased by animatronic then. Even louder. Eyes closed, she could still see the way he looked at her. See matted fur and exposed metal beneath the synthetic flesh. Like how I read that. Suddenly, the console in front of her was wrenched away and toppled over. Thrown down like a toy, the power cords beneath her hands and knees were yanked away. And Charlie slipped and stumbled, almost falling. She caught herself and looked up, just in time to see downward the swing of a hook. Oh, she's being chased by Foxy! Welcome to Hurricane, Utah. This is where we left off, where we found out where Five Nights at Freddy's takes place in Hurricane, Utah. Anyway, Charlie smiled wryly at the sign and kept driving. The world didn't look any different from one side of the sign to the other. But she felt nervous anticipation as she passed it. She didn't recognize anything she had not really expected to. Not this far at the edge of town, where it was all a highway and empty space. She wondered what the others looked like, who they were now. 10 years ago, they were best friends, and then it happened. Ooh, so she got chased by... Okay, and everything ended. At least for Charlie. She hadn't seen any of them since she was 7 years old. They all had ridden all the time as kids, especially Marla, who wrote like she talked, fast and incoherent. But as they grew together, they had grown apart. The letters had grown fewer and further between, and conversations leading up to this trip had perfunctory and full of awkward pauses. Charlie repeated their names as though to reassure herself that she still remembered them. Marla, Jessica, Lamar. Okay. Where? Oh, okay. Carlton, John, and Michael. That was the reason for the trip after all. Michael, it was 10 years since he died. What? Okay, since he died. 10 years since it happened. And now his parents wanted them all together for the dedication ceremony. All of his friends then there when they announced the scholarship they were creating in his name. Charlie knew it was a good thing to do, but gathering still felt slightly macabre. She shivered and turned down the air conditioning, even though she knew it was not the cold. As she drove into the town center, Charlie began to recognize things. A few stores and the movie theater, which was now advertising the summer's blockbuster hit. She felt a brief moment of surprise, then she smiled at herself. What did you expect? The whole place would be unchanged? A monument to the moment of your departure? Frozen forever in July 1985? Ooh, that's 2 more years since the fight. Well, that was exactly what she expected. She looked at her watch, still a few hours to kill before they all met up. She thought about going to the movie, but she knew that what she really wanted to do. Charlie made a turn left and headed out of town. Oh, she go there. 10 minutes later, she pulled to a stop to get out. The house loomed up before her, its dark outline wound in the bright sky. Charlie leaned back against the car, slightly dizzy. She took a moment to steady herself, breathing deeply. She had known it would be here, and a licked look through her aunt's bank books. A few years before told her that the mortgage of the house was paid off, and Aunt Jen was still paying property taxes. It had only been 10 years. There was no reason it should have been changed at all. Charlie climbed the steps slowly, taking in the peeling paint. The third stair was still a loose board, and the rose bushes had taken over one side of the porch, the horns biting hungrily into the wood. The door was locked, but Charlie still had her key. She never actually used it, as she slid it into the lock and remembered her father putting his chain around her neck in case you ever need it. Well, she needed it now. The door opened easily, and Charlie looked around. She didn't remember much about the first couple of years here. She had only been 3 years old. All the memories faded together in the blur of a child's grief and loss. Not understanding why her mother had to go away, clinging to her father at every moment. Not trusting the world around her unless he was there, unless she was holding tightly to him. Burying herself in his flannel shirts and the smell of grease and hot metal around him. The stairs stretched up in front of her, but she did not move directly to them. Going in instead to the living room, where all the furniture was still in place. She had not really noticed it as a child, but the house was a little too large for the furniture they had, and so they were spread out widely in order to fill the space. The coffee tables were too far from the couch to reach, the easy chair too far across the room to carry on a conversation. There was a dark stain in the wooden floorboards near the center of the room, and Charlie stepped around it quickly and went to the kitchen, where all the cupboards held only a few pots and pans and a few dishes. Charlie had never felt a lack of anything as a child, but it seemed now that the unnecessary of the house was sort of an apology. The intent of a man who lost so much to give to his daughter what he could. He had a way of overdoing what he did. The last time she was here, the house was dark, and everything felt wrong. She was being carried up the stairs to her bedroom, although she was 7 years old and could have gone quicker on her own 2 feet. But Aunt Jen picked her up as they stopped in front of the porch and carried her, shielding her face as though she were a baby in the glaring sun. In her room, Aunt Jen set her down and closed the bedroom door behind them, and told her to pack her suitcase. And Charlie cried, because all her things could never fit in the suitcase. "But we can come back for the rest later," Aunt Jen said, her impatience leaking through as Charlie hovered indecisively at her dresser, trying to decide which t-shirts to bring along. They had never come back for the rest. Charlie mounted the stairs, heading to her old bedroom. The door was open, and she opened it. She had a giddy feeling of displacement, as though her younger self might be sitting there among her toys. Look up and asked Charlie, "Who are you?" Charlie went in. Look, like the rest of the house, her bedroom was untouched. The walls were pale pink, and the ceiling, which was sloped dramatically on one side, following the line of the roof, was painted to the match. Her old bed still stood against the wall, beneath the large window, the mattress still intact, though the sheets were gone. The window was cracked slightly open, and rotting lace curtains wavered in the gentle breeze from outside. There was a dark water stain in the paint beneath the window, spreading to the mattress where the weather had gotten over the years. Betraying the house neglect, Charlie climbed over to the bed and forced the window shut. With a screech, it obeyed, and Charlie stepped back and turned her attention to the rest of the room, to her father's creations. Their first night in the house. Wow. Charlie was afraid to sleep alone. She did not remember the night, but her father had told her about it often, enough that the story had taken on the quality of memory. She sat up and wailed until her father came to find her, until he scooped her up and held her, and promised her he would make sure that she was never alone again. The next morning, he took her by the hand and led her to the garage, where she set to work keeping that promise. The first of his inventions was a purple rabbit. Oh! Wait a minute, what? Okay, now Gray from the age of sitting in the sunlight. Her father named him Theodore. He was the size of a 3-year-old child, her size at the time, and he had plush fur, shining eyes, and a dapper red bow tie. Oh my god! Okay, he didn't do much, only waved a hand and tilted his head to the side and said in her father's voice, "I love you, Charlie." But it was enough to give her a night watcher, someone to keep her company when she could not sleep. Right now, Theodore sat in the white wicker chair in the far corner of the room. Charlie waved at him, but not activated. He did not wave back. After Theodore, the toys got more complex. Some worked and some did not. Some seemed to have permanent glitches, and others simply did not appeal to Charlie's childish imagination. She knew her father took those back to her workshop and recycled them for parts, though she did not like to watch them dismantled. but the ones that were kept, those she loved. And they were here now. Looking at her expectantly, smiling, Charlie pushed a button beside her bed. It gave away stiffly, but nothing happened. She pushed it again, holding it down longer. And this time, across the room, with a wary creak of metal on metal, the unicorn began to move. The unicorn, who Charlie had named Stanley for some reason she could no longer remember, it was made of metal and had been painted glossy white. And it trotted around the room on a circular track, bobbing its head stiffly up and down. The track squealed now as it rounded the corner and came to a stop beside where Charlie sat on the bed. She got down and knelt beside him on the floor, patting his flank. Okay, his glossy paint was chipped and peeling, and his face had given over to rust, so that his eyes gazed lively out of decay. "You need a new coat of paint, Stanley," Charlie said out loud. The unicorn gazed ahead, unresponsive. At the foot of the bed, there was a wheel, made of patched-together metal. It had always reminded her of something that she might find on a submarine. Charlie turned to it. It stuck for a moment, then gave way, rotating, as it always did. Across the room, the smallest closet door swung open, and sailed Ella on her track, a child-sized doll bearing a teacup and saucer in her tiny hands like an offering. Ella's plaid dress was still crisp, and her patent leather shoes still shone. Perhaps in the closet she had been protected from the damage of the damp. Charlie had an identical outfit. Okay. But when she and Ella were in the same height. "Hi, Ella," she said softly as the wheel unwound. Ella retreated to her closet again, the door closing behind her. Charlie followed her to the closet wall. The closets had been built to align with the slant of the ceiling. And there were 3 of them. Ella lived in the short one, which was about 3.5 feet tall. Next to it was a foot or so higher, and the third closet to the bedroom door was the same height as the rest of the room. She smiled, remembering. Okay, wait. Okay, what just happened? Okay, why do you have 3 closets? John had demanded the first time he came over. She looked at him blankly, confused by the question. "'Cause that's how many there are there. Okay. She said finally. "Oh my God, what's wrong with me?" Then defensive, she pointed to the littlest one. "That one's Ella, anyway," she added. John nodded, satisfied. So John was one of the kids that, I guess, made it away from the purple guy. Sorry about my reading, too, by the way. Just woke up. I don't even know why I read this one after I just woke up. Anyway, Charlie shook her head and opened the door to the middle closet. Or tried to. The knob stopped with a jolt. It was locked. She rattled it a few times, but gave up without much conviction. She stayed crouched too... Shut up, train. She stayed crouched too low... Oh my God. She crouched low to the floor and glanced up to the tallest closet. Her big girl closet that she would someday grow into. You won't need it until you're bigger," her father would say. But that day never came. Now hung open slightly, but Charlie didn't disturb it. It had only opened for her. It had only given away time. Before she stood, she noticed something shiny, half hidden under the rim of the locked middle door. She leaned forward to pick it up. It looked like a broken piece of circuit board. She smiled slightly, nuts and bolts and scraps. The parts had turned up all over the place. Once upon a time, her father always had stray parts in his pockets. He would carry something oh my God, train. He would carry something he was working around and set it down and forget where it was. Or worse, put something aside for safekeeping, never to be seen again. There was also a strand of her hair clinging to it. She unwound it carefully from the tiny lip of metal it was stuck on. Finally, as though she had been putting it off, oh my God, train, Charlie crossed the room and picked up Theodore. His back had not faded in the sun like the front of his body, and was the same rich dark purple she remembered. She pressed a button at the base of his neck, but he remained lifeless. His fur was threadbare, and one ear hanging loose by a single rotting thread. And through the hole, she could see a green plastic of his circuit board. Charlie held her breath, listening fearfully for something. "I-O lie." "I lie," the rabbit said with a barely audible halting noise. Charlie set him down, her face hot and her chest pinched tight. She had not really expected to hear her father's voice again. I love you too. Oh! What's wrong with me? I swear. Charlie looked around the room again as the child. It had been her own magical world, and she was possessive of it. Only a few chosen friends were ever even allowed inside. She went to her bed and set Stanley moving on his track again. She left, closing the door behind her before the little unicorn came to a halt. She went out the back door to the driveway and stepped in front of the garage that had become her father's workshop. Half buried in the gravel a few feet away was a piece of metal, and Charlie picked it up. It was jointed in the middle, and she held it in her hand, smiling a little as she bent it back and forth. An elbow joint, she thought. I wonder who that was going to belong to. She stood in this exact spot many times before. She closed her eyes, and the memory overwhelmed her. She was a little girl again, sitting on the floor of her father's workshop, playing with scraps of wood and metal as though they were toy blocks, trying to build a tower with uneven pieces. The shot was hot, and she was sweaty, grime sticking to her legs as she sat in her shorts and sneakers. She could almost smell the sharp metallic odor of the soldering iron. Her father was nearby, never out of sight, working on Stanley the unicorn. Stanley's face was unfinished on one side, white and shining and friendly, with a shiny brown eye that seemed almost to see. The other half of the toy's face was all exposed, circuit boards and metal parts. Charlie's father looked to her and smiled, and she smiled back. Beloved, behind her father, in a darkened corner, barely visible, hung a jumble of metal limbs, a twisted skeleton with burning silver eyes. Oh, okay, that's creepy. Every once in a while, it gave an uncanny twitch. Are these the endoskeletons? Okay, Charlie tried to never look at it, but as her father worked, as she played with her makeshift toys, her eye was drawn back to it. Again and again, the limbs contorted. It seemed almost mocking. The thing a ghastly jester. So this is the endoskeleton. And yet, there was something about it that suggested the enormous pain. Daddy, Charlie said, and her father did not look up from his work. Daddy, she said again, more urgently, and this time, he turned slowly to her, as though not fully present in the world. What do you need, sweetie? She pointed at the metal skeleton. Does it hurt? She wanted to ask a question, but looking into her father's eyes, she found she could not. She shook her head. Nothing. He nodded at her with an absent smile and went back to his work. Behind him, the creature gave another awful twitch, and his eyes still burned. Charlie shivered and drew herself back to it. So if I may say right quick, so if her father, by chance, did create the animatronics, then the animatronics from the start must have been messed up. So this is probably showing us that the animatronics from the start were actually messed up. Okay, so Charlie shivered and drew herself back to the present. She glanced behind her, feeling exposed. She looked down and her gaze fixed on something. 3 widely spaced grooves in the ground. She knelt, thoughtful, and ran her finger over one of them. The gravel was scattered away, the marks worn heavily on the dirt. A camera tripod of some sort. Let me read that again. A camera tripod of some sort. It was the first unfamiliar thing she'd seen. The door to the workshop was cracked open slightly, inviting, but she felt no desire to go inside. Quickly, she headed back to her car. Settling into the driver's seat, she stopped. Her car keys were gone! No! Okay, no! Her car keys were gone, having probably fallen out of her pocket somewhere inside of the house. She retraced her steps, only glancing into the living room and the kitchen before heading up to her bedroom. The keys were on the wicker chair beside Theodore the bear. She picked them up and jingled them for a moment, not quite ready to leave the room behind. She sat down on the bed, stealing the unicorn had come back around the bed before stopping as he always did. As she sat, she patted him absently on the head. It had grown dark while she was outside, and the room was cast in shadows. Somehow, without the bright sunlight, the toy's flaws and their deterioration were shown into sharp relief. Theodore's eyes were no longer shown, and his thin fur hanging ear made him look sickly vagabond. When she looked down at Stanley, the rust around his eyes made him look like hollow sockets, and his in his bare teeth, which she always thought of a smile, but became awful, gnawing grin of a skull. Oh, God! I'm just imagining this as I read. Sorry about that. Charlie stood up, careful not to touch him, and hurried to the door, but she tripped on the tracks and fell sprawling on the floor. Oh, come on, not toy demons. Her foot catching on the wheel beside the bed as she went. There was a whir of spinning metal as she raised her head. A small pair of feet appeared under her nose, a cloud of shining patent leather, and she looked up. Oh, God. There above her was Ella, staring down at her. Silent and uninvited, her glassy eyes almost... Guys, this is scary. Okay. What just happened? Okay, there we go. There above her was Ella, staring down at her. Silent and uninvited, her glassy eyes almost appearing to see. The teacup and saucer were held out before her with a military stiffness. And Charlie got up cautiously, taking care not to disturb the doll. She went out the room, stepping carefully to avoid the accidentally activating any other toys. As she went, Ella almost matched her pace, retreating to her closet. Oh, good, Ella is not chasing her. Charlie hurried down the stairs, seized by an urgency to get away. In the car, she fumbled the key 3 times before sliding it into place. She backed up too fast down the driveway, running recklessly over grass of the front yard, and sped away. After about a mile, Charlie pulled off on the shoulder and turned the car off, staring straight ahead through the windshield, her eyes focused on nothing. She forced herself to breathe slowly. She reached up and adjusted the rear view mirror so she could see herself. She always expected to see pain, anger, sorrow written on her face, but they never were. Her cheeks were pink around her face, looked almost cheerful like always. Her first weeks of living with Aunt Jen, being introduced to Jen's friends, she heard the same thing over and over. What a pretty child. What a happy-looking child she is. Charlie always looked like she was about to smile. Her brown eyes and wide sparkling, her thin mouth ready to curve up, even when she wanted to sob. I can't read right now. I'll just say incongruently, a mild betrayal. She ran her fingers through her light brown hair as though that would magically fix its slight frizziness, and put the back mirror into position. She turned the car back on and searched for a radio station, hoping music might bring her fully back to reality. She flipped from station to station, not really hearing what any of them were playing, and finally settled on an AM broadcast with a host who seemed to be yelling constantly at his audience. She had no idea what he was talking about, but the brash and annoying sound was enough to jar her back into the present. The clock in her car was always wrong, but she checked her watch. It was almost time to meet her friends at the diner they had chosen near the center of town. What did they choose? Charlie pulled back onto the road and drove, letting the sound of the angrily talk radio host soothe her mind. When she reached the restaurant, Charlie pulled back into the lot and stopped, but did not park. The front of the diner had a large picture window all across it. Oh no, what is it? All she could see right inside, though she had not seen them for years. It took her only a moment to spot her friends through the window. Jessica was the easiest to pick out from the crowd. She always enclosed pictures with her letters, and right now she looked exactly like her last photo. Excuse me. Even seated, she was clearly taller than either of the boys, and very thin. Though Charlie could not see her whole outfit, she was wearing a loose white shirt with an embroidered vest and had a brimmed hat perched down on her glossy shoulder-length brown hair, an enormous flower threading to tip it off her head. She was talking, gesturing excitedly about something. She was talking gesturing excitedly about something as she spoke. The two boys were sitting next to each other. Facing her, Carlton looked like an older version of his red-headed childhood self. He still had a bit of a baby face, but his features had refined, and his hair was carefully tousled and refined. Wait. Yeah, and held in place by some alchemical hair product. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. Jeez. What's wrong with me today? Anyway, he was almost pretty for a boy and wore a black workout shirt. Though she doubted he'd never worked out a day in his life, He was slouched forward on a table, resting his chin in his hands. Beside him was John, sitting closest next to the window. John had been the kind of child who had been the kind of child who got dirty before he even went outside. There would be paint on his shirt before the teacher handed out the watercolors, grass stains on his knees, before they came out near the playground, and dirt under his fingernails just after he washed his hands. Charlie knew it was him, but because it had to be. He looked completely different. The grubbiness of childhood had been replaced by some crisp and clean. He was wearing a neatly pressed light green button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up and the collar open, preventing him from looking too uptight. And he was leaned back confidently in the booth, nodding enthusiastically, apparently absorbed in whatever Jessica was saying. The only concession to his former self was his hair, sticking up all over his head, and a 5 o'clock shadow mug, adult version of the dirt he was always covered in as a child. Charlie smiled to herself. Charlie had always been something like her childhood crush, before either of them had really understood what he meant. He gave her cookies from his Transformers lunchbox, and once in kindergarten. Took the blame when she broke the glass jar, that had held colored beads for his arts and crafts. She remembered the moment when it slipped from her hands, and she watched it fall. She could have not moved fast enough to catch it. But she would have not tried. She wanted to see it break. The glass hit the wood floor. Dang, she's a bad child. And shattered into 1,000 pieces. And the beads scattered, many colors among shards. She thought it was beautiful, and then started to cry. John had a note sent home to his parents, and when she told him, "Thank you," and he had winked at her with an irony behind his ears, and simply said, "For what?" After that, John was allowed to come back to her room. She let him play with Stanley and Theodore, watching anxiously the first time as he learned to press the buttons and make them move. She would be crushed if he didn't like them. Knowing instinctively that he did not, she would think less of him. They were her family, but John was fascinated as soon as he saw them. Her loved mechanical toys, and so she loved him. 2 years later, behind a tree beside her father's workshop, she almost let him kiss her, and then it happened, the murders. And everything ended, at least for Charlie. Charlie shook herself, forcing her mind back to the present, looking at Jessica's polished appearance. She looked down at herself. Purple t-shirt, denim jacket, black jeans, and combat boots. Oh God, it's Purple Guy! It had felt like a good choice this morning, but now she wished that she had chosen something else. This is all you ever wear, she reminded herself. So you wear something purple, but you know what happened, and now you just want to remind yourself on purpose? I don't know about Charlie. I think she's just an idiot. Why would you do that? Anyway, all right. She found a parking space, locked the car behind her, even though people in Hurricane, Utah did not usually lock their cars. That's dumb. And went into the diner to meet her friends for the first time in 10 years. The warmth and noise of the restaurant hit her in a wave as she entered, and for a moment she was overwhelmed, but Jessica saw her pause in the doorway and shouted her name, and Charlie smiled and went over. Alright guys, I think that's about it for this chapter. Don't worry, I'll be doing a chapter 1 part 2. Anyway guys, if you guys want me to keep reading this, make sure you slide on 10 times, comment below, subscribe for it to become a Kister today. Follow me on social media, CistReadZ, and make sure you check out my shop. And answer the question in the video as well. It's at the very end of the description. Just tell me if you guys want me to keep on going with this. And, please, excuse my reading. I just got up and I keep getting up to read and it's stupid. Anyway, guys, I will see you awesome kissers later. Peace out.